recording. Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream on Twitch. And before we get started today, I obviously want to mention, for anyone who has not already heard the news, we are very, very excited to announce that we are going to be having a convention for Handmade Hero. And you can actually find out more about it. You can really just type handmadecon.org into your browser and hit return, and it will take you directly to whatever the latest post about it is. We just put up the very first post about it, which is kind of like our save the date post. It lets you know when it is. You can buy tickets if you want to at the early bird kind of price, early registration price. And it tells you kind of where it is and when it is in case you want to, if you know it's something you're definitely going to want to attend, you can plan your trip already and get everything all set. And what we'll be doing over the next month, or the month of October, is we'll be posting at least 2 more blog posts. I don't know if I think that might cover just about everything. We're posting 2 more blog posts with quite a bit more information about it. One will be the complete speaker list for Handmade Hero Con 2015, which the sort of setup for the conference is going to be very specifically is going to be quite different from what a typical programming conference consists of. Instead of sort of a series of lectures where someone gets up and runs through a PowerPoint presentation slide at a time, it's going to be the opposite of that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to essentially take the people who are going to be the speakers at it, quote unquote. And I say that because it's a weird term when you say speakers. Like, obviously, lots of different people speak at a convention. But basically, the guests of honor, let's say, right? What we're going to do is I am going to sort of act as the person who is going to talk to them about their past projects, their current projects, their future projects, the programming involved with them, what were some of the most interesting problems they faced, how did they solve them, that sort of thing. And it's designed to recreate sort of the more, sort of what I would say, the more intimate, the more interesting way that programming knowledge actually gets shared. When you go out to dinner with somebody who's, a really great programmer or something like this, or you happen to meet them at a conference, at the bar or something like this, and you strike up a conversation and you actually get to talk to them about, like, in sort of an interactive way, the stuff they work on, and to ask questions dynamically. And so the whole thing is kind of like a more real, more direct experience. It's not passing through this filter of somebody spent a lot of time like thinking about slides and making bullet points and kind of like cramming sort of the way their brain naturally works and naturally explains things into this sort of like weird, awkward format. And so, again, the goal is to really kind of have it be much more of a like kind of session where you can kind of drill down into things and let, sort of the natural way that people think about things and talk about things come out. And my reasoning for that is just because I've always found that it's so much more useful and interesting for me when I have been able to talk to great developers that way. And I always feel like there's just a tremendous amount lost when I go listen to lectures by the same people, because it just doesn't have the fluidity and the speed and the interesting sort of like directness when the person is just able to talk about what it was that they did and have an inquisitive person on the other end to direct that towards like the really interesting parts and the confusing parts of it that they want to know more about, right? So I've designed the conference to kind of around that. And I'm really excited about it because I've never really seen it done that much before. There are kind of models of this a little bit. There's some things that I've seen where people have done sort of like interview style things like this, but never quite in the way that I kind of had hoped, and certainly never for programming that I've seen. So I'm pretty excited to try it. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. And the other thing that I think that it does, which is pretty important, is it also allows us to potentially talk to people who we wouldn't ordinarily be able to talk to because their schedules are too busy, or a small con like Handmade Con wouldn't be worth their time to do all the prep for, or something like this, because it's a small interactive thing where they just come and they be themselves and they talk. Or people who don't like public speaking, or don't know how to prepare a presentation but are great programmers, and people that we want to hear from. It also allows us to talk to people like that too, right? So it means that now it's like it can be anybody who we think is like a great game developer or something. They can share their knowledge with us, and they can share how they do what they do. And I think that to me is a really important aspect of it too, because there's so much artifice in the normal way that programming conferences force people to present, and I don't think it actually yields much like better content. I think it often yields worse content, and it greatly restricts the number of people who are willing to do it or have time to do it that year or who want to bother, and all these other things. So I'm really interested in this, and I'm pretty excited about doing it this way. And so the people that I'm selecting, who I'm going out and trying to say, hey, do you want to do this, and sort of get them interested in the whole concept of this, are all people who I want to have that dialogue with. So I'm like specifically picking, programmers who it's like there's stuff that they're working on now or that they worked on in the past that I think is really, really interesting, that I don't super understand how they did it or like the way they did it. And I want to have that conversation with them where I'm like, tell me about how you did this. Tell me about how you solved this problem. What was this development process like? I'm basically selecting it to be like stuff that I really want to know, because I feel like if I want to know it, it must be something relatively rare, right? It's like it's not going to just be something that you would just know if you're a game developer. It's going to be something kind of unique and special. And I feel like that's the most interesting thing that we could do with the conference, is to kind of get at some of those things that are really sort of interesting, insightful things that oftentimes, you have to, the only way you're ever going to get to know those things is if you happen to have the good fortune to know one of these people personally and go out to dinner with them or talk with them on a regular basis or something like that. So that's the whole point behind HandmadeCon. And like I said, we will be announcing the people who will be the guests of honor when we get that list completely nailed down. It will probably be, I'm guessing it will be 5 people. Based on the way that I've looked at the times. Because basically we have the venue from 10 in the morning till 6 at night. And so assuming that people, at some point have to break for lunch, that leaves us enough time, I think, to do 5 solid sessions of that with 5 different people. I could go up to 6, but I was looking at it and I was saying, well, I'd rather do one less person and have a little more time with everybody else than try to cram more people in there and not, have to end the sessions just when we were getting to something really interesting that we wanted to talk more about. And all of the people that I've been approaching are all people who I strongly suspect that even with an hour 15, an hour 30 minutes, between all the things that I want to ask them, and then we probably want to have, as a little bit of time for audience questions as well and stuff like that, I really just don't think we're going to do probably more than 5. So my plan is there'll be 5 people who I really want to talk to, and that will be the way that we do the conference, and we'll talk to them pretty in depth, probably, like I said, for about hour 15, hour 30 would be my hope. It may be that again it has to be a little shorter, again just because of timing, and we'll see. Since it's the first year doing this, I do expect that there will be some bumps. I'm not going to lie to you. Like the chances that me by myself with very little resources am going to be able to run things completely without a hitch is probably not realistic. But again, like I said, I tried to keep things very, very simple. So the chances that we'll all be able to just show up, run a good con, have a lot of fun and get a lot of really great information are pretty high, because the number of things that have to get done for that to happen, I've tried to keep them to an absolute minimum. I've picked a good space for it. It's a really nice place, and it's really easy to get to. It's central. It's easy to find places to stay around it. It's a notable landmark in Seattle, so it's pretty easy to find as well. So I'm thinking that probably we've got a really solid chance of, even though this is the first time we're doing it, I think we probably will be able to keep it relatively smooth. Like I said on the pre-stream, and like I said in the post, if you read it, one of the things that will probably not go smoothly, that's a separate issue, is I really don't know what we'll be able to do in terms of getting the content streamed. my goal for the conference, because Handmade Hero is a online show that's performed live, and the questions are taken live over the internet and all that stuff, is that I would like the conference to be streamed live as well. I approached Twitch about that several months ago. They said they would do it, but of course, they're entitled to change their mind. So I have told them, now that we've got all the dates nailed down, I was like, here's when it's going to be, and I've asked them to please help us stream it. If they're like, yes, let's do, we can totally do that, then it'll happen. But, they might say, no, we changed our mind, or we don't have the resources for that right now, or something like that. That's totally within their purview, right? They're under no obligation to help with it, and, they're doing it just to be nice, basically. So, it's just a straight up charitable thing for them to do to help the community. So I don't know what they'll say. I'll keep you posted on that, but that's what I've asked them to do, and they were definitely receptive to it, and I think they're going to try to make it happen, but no promises, because, like I said, it's just a straight up charity thing for them to do. They might not have it in their budget, they might not have the time to do it, they may be overextended at that point, I don't know. So fingers crossed, that'll be what happens. But if that doesn't happen, we will probably not try to stream it live ourselves, because we just don't have the expertise for that. I definitely don't know how to do that. If other people who think that they do have the expertise for that want to give it a shot, I would certainly go ahead and give them a live stream key for that day, and they could give it a shot. So, if people out there want to try and to do that, if Twitch is not able to help us, then that could certainly happen as well. But like I said, that part I cannot guarantee. So for people out there who can't make the con, I can't promise that it will be able to be viewed live. I just don't have the resources to make sure that I can really actually guarantee that that'll happen. So I promise we'll try, but I just don't know realistically what will happen. Same thing with video recording. I would very much like it to be recorded so that people can view it after the fact on YouTube, especially if it cannot be streamed live, in which, so there would not be a way to watch it remotely. So failing the ability to, to have it streamed live on Twitch, we would also then, of course, try to do a permanent archival recording of it. Again, no promises there, because it's just not my expertise. We will try to ask some people to try and film it, and hopefully that goes smoothly and that the audio is okay. But again, I really just don't have any control over that. It's way beyond my thing that I ever do. I don't do AV for anything, so, that stuff is just not a guarantee. We'll try, but it's not a guarantee. Everything else, I think we'll probably be able to pull off just fine, but those two things are ones that are very technological in nature, mostly about having the experience to know all the little things that can go wrong when you do something like that. And so, if Twitch can do it, I think it'll be great, because they have the experience. They would know how to do it. They would know how to not screw it up. But if they don't, then we're just going to have to sort of wing it, and I don't really know how that will be. But so that aside, I think everything else for HandmadeCon has been coming along quite well, and I'm pretty excited about how it's going, and I think it's going to be really great. So that is it for HandmadeCon. I'll mention it a few more times on streams as we go. For people who may or may not be catching this one live, I'll mention it a few more days from now. But now you've basically got all the information about it. And like I said, I will, as soon as there is another post about speakers or about other things about the conference, I will mention them at the start of the stream so you can check them out. All right. All that said, we have a bunch of programming to do. So we need to start doing it. Today is day 194 on Handmade Hero. And we are in the midst of doing some work with our debug viewing. We're adding features so that we can have sort of a fairly reasonable set of tools for inspecting the behavior of our game as we go. I would like to sort of push a little harder on the UI today. And also, I think I figured out a way that we may be able to have our cake and eat it too, as far as debug variables is concerned. I'm not 100% sure, but I did think of a way to do that. And I don't know if we want to necessarily do that today, but I did think I figured out a way. I was thinking about it, where we could have both the pluses of having ability to compile things in and out entirely at runtime, as well as the ability to live update things instantaneously. So I was thinking that maybe there is a way to sort of do something really wacky there that might work. Don't necessarily know, can't promise, but we may try that as well. For now, though, I'd like to do a little bit more work on the UI, so that's what we're going to do. Today on day 194, if you would like to follow along at home, you will want to unzip day 193 source code. If you pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, that is the source code that we're going to be starting with here. And that is, if you want to kind of follow along with the exact same code that I'm doing, that is the source code that you want to start with. All right. So here's where we left off. We had our Handmade hero, right? And we had like kind of a really, for lack of a better term, a very ugly radial menu that we had implemented. And it allows us to recompile the game, set switches, and change the actual compilation of the game at runtime, right? So for example, right now you can see that we're using the sort of small render plate here instead of the full screen one. And so if we want to, for example, then that's a compile time switch. If we want to, we can actually go pick the debug option that changes that. It's this one right here, right? Test weird draw buffer size. And if we toggle that, then you can see that it actually did recompile the game right there, reloaded the game on the fly, and went, which is kind of awesome. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's one of those things that's just so neat. You can be in the game, you can go like this, and now you recompiled, and the game like didn't even lose its state, right? That's the kind of thing, again, that a lot of people turn to scripting languages for because they want that kind of functionality, and it's kind of neat that we basically just totally got it here on Handmade Hero without ever having to leave C. So we can totally do completely performance-oriented code anytime we want, but anytime we don't want, right? Like anytime we want the convenience of a scripting language, we actually get that for free now that we've done that work, which is pretty great. So that's pretty darn neat. But like I said, this radial menu is like really super ugly, not very functional, and it also doesn't really allow us to provide very many options here, right? You could imagine if we tried to scale this up to 100 debug options, not only would it be a crazy radial menu to try and pick from, but it would also have a pretty nasty problem of finding where they were would be pretty darn tough, right? So at the very least, we're probably going to want to do something hierarchical, right? Even if we stuck with just a radial menu, you'd want something where maybe you could pick a category and then pick something from it, or things like this. And what I'm thinking personally about this, right, is that in general, I want sort of a clutch style thing like I talked about before, where I will just right-click and some UI will come up, I can do some stuff, and then it goes away. So that the debug stuff is always out of my way, and I can just always get to it this way. And so when this comes up, what I'm thinking of more is I want this radial menu. The reason I put a radial menu in there is I want a quick menu, something that I can access quickly. And I feel like the radial menu will do that for me. But that is just for certain highly used things that I might want to turn on and off, like profile information or something like that, right? So I want to now create an additional piece of UI before we refine the radial menu at all, before we go any further down that path, because that's sort of, it's already sort of functional. I want to get some other things functional as well. I want to create something that will allow us to do a more sort of a more extensive user interface for categorizing larger series of things. So I'm thinking about something like a scrolling hierarchical tree view kind of a thing, some kind of standard interface thing, so that when I hit the right mouse button, and another thing too is when I just hit the right mouse button, it just kind of blinks right now. What I want to do is also change that so that like you can just click the right mouse button once and then the menu will stay up as I interact with it. And then if you hold down and then release the button with a gesture, it will select from the radial menu so that we can have our speed cake and eat our functionality too. To coin a phrase, a very bad phrase. I notice the familiar is following me too. I feel like I want to turn that off. Familiar follows hero. All right, so now the familiar is not following the hero. All right. So yeah, so that's what I would like to do, is I would like to have some way, I suppose our ground chunks should probably also not be so ridiculous, huh? Where is that? Ground chunk checkerboards. Oh, and you know what? We would also have to turn on the rebuild on recompute ground chunks on exechange so that they will flush. Having recompile on the fly code is just so darn neat. I'm sorry. That's just super cool. Anyway, so yeah, what I want to do here is I want to figure out some kind of way that I'm thinking maybe like something where, you know, on the side here, maybe, I'm just throwing this out there. So maybe something on the side here that's just going to be kind of a list. And the list could have some hierarchical options in it, right? So like in the list, maybe, you know, we've got stuff like, you know, rendering and simulation and whatever, right? So that we can categorize things as to where they might belong in that list. You know? And then we could find things easier, and even if there's like thousands of options, they could be in some kind of nested sense. So finding them is is easier because you can kind of pare down what it looks like at each time, right? So that's what I'd like to do. So I'm just going to go ahead in there, and since, like I said, I have no idea really what form that's going to take or what that's going to do, what I'd like to do is just go in there and make something, much like we did the radial menu, that just does that, something like that. And so that we can start to investigate the code and build something relatively reasonable. So that's what I'd like to do, and I'm going to start doing it so that we can figure out how it should go. All right. So here we are in Handmade Debug. And as you know, in Handmade Debug, right, we have the thing that draws this debug main menu here. It draws that radial thing, right? And this is the thing that kind of, it loops over whatever we have listed in our, we've got our debug variables array, right? So here is that debug variables array. This lists all of the variables that we have in the debug system. And those debug variables obviously all get sort of listed in the radial menu right now, which is not at all something that I actually want to have happen. So we know that the radial menu will go to being something that loops over this array, to being something that only loops over some very specific certain ones of that, right? Certain, very specific certain things. And what I would point out here is this debug variable list is in no way needs to be actually a flat array or anything like that. We saw with the debug counters and those sorts of things, we have time-sensitive macros that have to do and that have to like operate on multiple threads and write into buffers and all this other stuff. So the other debug stuff kind of had to be careful. They had to be these global variables, and they had to be written into by threads in a special way and all this stuff. There's all this sort of restrictions on how those could be. But the debug variable list fundamentally is nothing more than just a list of debug variables that could be constructed in any way by anyone at any time. It's not edited by the code at all. And in fact, if we look at the config file, this config file is actually the thing that the program reads and writes, right? Those are the actual pound defines that actually get read and write by the program. So while this file has to look like this because Handmade Hero reads and writes it, this part right here, I'm free to do whatever I want with it. So what I think we could pretty trivially do here is just instead of constructing it, and as a slight aside, C, unfortunately, and C++ as well, do a very bad job of allowing to enter data. It's one of the biggest snafus of C and C++ is the fact that they didn't think through the fact that people would want to enter data in along with their code, right? And so they only have the most sort of rudimentary, unfortunate ways of actually putting data in. Basically, the only thing you can do is just make a big old flat list. That's it. And it's pretty hard to do anything else, actually. You end up in kind of nasty situations if you want to do anything such as like dynamically sized things where you have like a pointer to an array or something. They've always made it very difficult for you to flat define those in convenient ways. So what I like to do in circumstances, especially like this, where there isn't any particular reason why I have to make this be an actual data value constructed by the compiler, is I like to go ahead and make it something that's just constructed at startup by the actual runtime code. And of course, we do know already that we have the ability to initialize our debug code. We've got some stuff right here, right? It's got an arena that it can do things with to create stuff of various sizes. So if I wanted to right here, I could go ahead and create a dynamic version of this that is actually created at startup. And the reason I'd like to do that is to make it easier for me to construct this as, instead of a flat list of things, actually a hierarchical list of things that will allow us to do things like put that sort of tree view or something like that into place, right? So here's the way I would like to do that. What I'd like to do is create like a little place for me to put that, right? So I'm just going to create a function to hold this code. We'll call that debug create variable hierarchy or something like this. Debug create variables, debug create something. Name is hard. Brain doesn't know what name is. English so difficult. 500,000 words. And so what we'll do here is we'll just pass in a memory arena that it can use to allocate its stuff, and it'll just use the debug arena there. And then what we could do is recreate this list instead of having it in handmade debug variables.h. Or you know what, even we could just even put it in handmade debug variables.h. We can actually just have it exist in here. So that, again, because again, my reasoning for doing this was because I wanted to make it so that it was kind of confined to one place, so that it was easy to know where you went to add a debug variable. So we could totally do that. Again, pretty trivial for us to do. So when we do our debug variable listing here, what we would then do is say, okay, instead of doing a list this way, right, we'll just do a list this way. So exact same code, basically, in terms of what we're typing in, but instead of the macro expanding to a fixed data definition, we're just going to change that to actually call a function that creates the variable, right? So we'll just have like debug add variable or something like that. And it passes in the name, both stringized and the actual value of that name regular, right? So there you go. So if I do that, then I will have the ability to start doing some other things, right? I would have the ability, for example, to create groups of these just by using a little, begin group, something like this, and then end group. And so what I could do there is say, like, okay, so, use debug camera, use space outlines maybe, and I'm just making this up. It's not really important. We'll probably have a lot more opinions about this sort of thing. Maybe use room-based camera as well. That seems like the kind of things, ground chunk outlines maybe. Well, I don't know. Maybe not that. You can sort of see how we might start to put these into groups, right? There's ground chunk outlines, ground chunk checkerboards. We've got recompute ground chunks. That sort of starts to look like, a group of things that are based on ground chunk things. So maybe we say, okay, this is a group. It's called the ground chunks group, right? And then here's particles, right? And so maybe we have another group that's like particles. And then here I've got some things that are like rendering related. And so maybe this is just called renderer. And this is maybe called camera. Use space outlines is probably actually something that's more out in sim for the moment. End debug end variables group. And you can see how now we're starting to break it up a little bit. And so now we have some places that these things can go. And now instead of looking at all of these options together, if you're looking for something that affects the camera, you would just click on camera first, and then you would be able to get down to the things that are affecting the camera or something like this, right? And then similarly here, maybe we just don't know what these are, so they're uncategorized for now, and they just go at the end. I have no idea. Again, we can sort of just make this up as we go along. And similarly, we might want to do something, I don't think this is necessarily how we would want to organize it, but I just would sort of say we could sort of do something like this, just so we can test the ability to have our groups be a little bit more nested, because we may want that in the future. I'm kind of conceptualizing this as being able to fit a lot. I'm going to want a lot of debug options. So I would like to make sure that it's not just one level of hierarchy. We can have as many layers of the hierarchy going down as we want. So that's what I would like to do there. And similarly, I think this debug UI thing is fine and all, but it's kind of annoying to always have it there. So I think what I would rather do is probably do something like this, right? So this way we don't have to say debug UI ever, we just say it like that. And that way when we get the actual names of the things in there, they're kind of a little bit more straightforward or readable or whatever, right? Two ways to do that, right? That's one way we could do it. Seems like a pretty good way. I don't actually know, but that just seems like probably the most reasonable thing. But yeah, maybe the better way to do it would be to actually just put a second string after it that's different. I don't know. We'll see how we like it. It's not hard at this stage to change it, but before we add too many of these guys, before we have 200 of them, we'd probably want to make sure we kind of know, right? So yeah, I'll put in these as a, since we put those to-dos in there, we'll leave those there. I'm going to go ahead and make this kind of a local macro. So it's only in there because it's the only place that people really should be ever using that macro. And so that is what I want to implement. And so we've got a begin variable group. We've got an end variable group. And we have an add variable. At the moment, that's all we have. And the add variable, that takes the name of the variable, and it takes the value of the variable at the moment. And in the future, I think one of the things about that is we're not going to be 100% certain which kind of variable each one of these things is just by its type. So we won't necessarily know if something's a bool or a int, whereas we would probably know if it's a floating point value or not, right? Because that's a little bit clearer, potentially. But that, again, that's just something kind of to keep in mind. So yeah, so we'll take it, but for now we only have Boolean, so we'll kind of look at that. We'll let that kind of come out as it comes. We won't try to do anything weird with that at the moment. But here we go. Okay. So the other thing that I'm going to want is I'm going to want a little context thing here, so that stuff can be recorded a little more cleanly. So inside debug create variable. And all those sorts of things, we're going to want the debug state, I feel like, for these things. And the debug state, probably, I maybe even want a little bit more. So I probably want like a debug variable definition context kind of a thing that's going to wrap up my debug state, my memory arena, which is what I'm going to need to implement it. And then probably also something here like the debug variable group or whatever, right? I'm going to need to know that as these groups get sort of pushed and popped. That's something that I'm going to have to sort of be aware of, right? And similarly, as they get pushed and popped, we'll have to create like some structs to store it. So I'm just kind of like hypothetically saying I'm going to need that there. So I don't know yet exactly what that'll be, but it's kind of obvious that it's going to have to happen. So anyway, here is the group name, right? And the context. This one, I guess, we'll just, again, just take that context straight up. And this would also take the context like so. So we'd call into those. And inside here, we know that we could always, pass that context like this. And similarly, these guys could always pass the context like this. Oops. And that's starting to look okay, right? That's starting to look like it's basically got everything that it needs. Should be pretty easy to implement. And that's about it. So let's take a look at what it would take to implement something like this, again, so that we can basically build the data structure, which we will then draw. So what we would need here is we have the concept of a debug variable defined right here. You can see we've got like a type for it, and we've got the debug variable itself. That's all there. So what we would want to do now is say that there's some way of holding these things, right? And so that would be where we would get this notion like of a debug variable group, you know? And the debug variable group would presumably have something like, I don't know, whatever its children are, you know? Something like this. So I'm not really sure exactly what that data structure should be, but I mean, I know that it has to hold more groups because, like, say I already said I want multiple levels of hierarchy, so I know I'm going to have like a group, and then each group can have multiple groups inside it. I know that's going to happen, and obviously I know it's going to have a name. But then I also am going to have some kind of a situation where I would have, you know, variables themselves, right? So a debug variable, I guess I would say, is probably not the right thing here. Probably what we're going to have is like a debug variable group. Maybe we'll just call this a debug group, and a debug group member. And a debug group member, right, could either be a variable or something like this, or, you know, maybe it could, in addition to being a variable, be another group. And in fact, I guess there's not really much reason, because debug variable is not really used in any other sense. So it could be that maybe debug variable itself is really just, we could just use it, because, I mean, like I said, it's debug code. There's really not that much point in having it be any fancier than that. We could just do something like this, right? Where now we have a set of things. Those things go in a group. And then we can just say that it's always a debug variable group, and sometimes a variable is just some kind of a group itself. It seems like a totally fine thing. So if we were to do that, then I guess what we would need to do is say, all right, the names and stuff like that are all going to be in sort of these debug variables, and that's all fine. But we need some way of maybe like chaining these things together so that we can iterate over them, or, you know, who knows, other things like that. And so if we were going to do that, I guess the easiest way to do that would be to say, like, every debug variable probably has like an X pointer in it so that we can kind of run through it. You know, we could have a child pointer to, you know, first child or something like that in case of a group, that sort of thing. For now, that seems like a pretty easy way to go, right? And so this B32 would actually be like the Boolean, right, or bool32. And so then this would be, if it's a group, that's what it would have. Now, the group probably will want more information than that, because now, you know, if it's a hierarchical list group view or something like that, then obviously like a debug variable group, or I guess it's just debug group, is now something that kind of exists inside here, because we're saying that these can be grouped. So there's our debug group, like that. It's going to have a pointer to the first child. But it would probably also, and again, I'm just like saying, I'm hypothetically saying, it might also have a thing like, did you expand it? Because like if the UI allows expanding and collapsing these groups, then there's probably a notion of what's its state right now. You know what I mean? So that's just an example of how this sort of thing might go. And if I want to build that, right? That's just like, right, I wrote the code here. This is the code I want to have happen. I know that I need to get it into something. This is the most simple something I could see storing that thing. And so now I'm just going to like type in the code that translates that to that, right? That translates this into that. So in order to begin a variable group, obviously I'm going to have to push onto my arena. I'm going to have to push one of these things. I'm always pushing a debug variable on there. And, you know, because I'm always going to be pushing a debug variable, no matter what kind of variable I do, I think I probably want to do something where that debug variable push, or just, you know, debug add variable, where it adds a generic variable, like this, is probably going to be sort of a root function. I'm going to pass it whatever the name is. I'm going to pass it whatever the type is. And everybody's going to call through this, right? Because I know that everybody, whether you're making a group, or making a Boolean, or making any of the other floating point, whatever kind of values we may want to have in the future, we know that you're going to call through this, right? And so what we want to do is have it so that you get the var out of the arena, you initialize the values that we know that all of them have, you know what I'm saying? And then you go ahead and return that thing. So then in here we've got our group in this case, and so in order to make the resulting group, all we have to do there, I guess we'll call it group. Oh, and you know what I just realized too? When we do this debug add variable, that should presumably add it to the group. I'm going to do a little thing here. If we only have a pointer to the first child, then one of the things that's very difficult if you have a singly linked list is if you want your variables to go in order, which I do, I want them to kind of be in order, we would have to reverse the order of them here because they're going to get pushed on, like the last person who gets added to the list would be the first person who shows up in the list because you always are adding them at the head end, right? And since I would rather have it go the other way, I want to store, I think, even though it's a singly linked list, I'm going to store the first and last pointer because it's really pretty trivial to do that, and then it means that as I add, I can add at the end, which is what I want, you know? All right. So if I do debug add variable, then implicitly what we want to say is in that case is that when we add, we always add to whatever the group is that we're working on right now, right? So whatever the open group actually is, that is the group to which this variable is added. And so we're going to say something like, after we create this variable, we now need to add it to the group. So we're going to say debug variable group equals context group. If that group is a valid pointer, meaning if there is any open group at all, because maybe the very first one we add, there'd be no open group, for example. Not ground, that's good. Then what we want to do is say that that group, it's got two cases, with a linked list. One case we have where there is something in the list, right? And another case is where there isn't something in the list. So if there's nothing in a list, it's really trivial to add something to the list, as you might expect, because in this case, all you have is the variable. All you have is the variable. The variable is the only thing that exists. As we all know, it is the everything. So basically, you're going to just have a next pointer of 0, which would be like the default thing anyway. Let me put that up above the union. So you've got a next pointer of 0, and you've just got a list that consists of nothing other than the very first person in the list. That's the first and last person. But assuming that there is something in the list, then what we would want to do is make the last child become the variable, right? And the variable's next pointer should point to the last child, right? Because, oh, sorry, that's not true. And the last child's next pointer should point to the variable, right? So whoever was last is not last anymore. We are last, and we point to them. And the last child is now up. We're moving that pointer forward to us. So we're just chaining out to the end. And the way that I like to write this to make it symmetric, I think is kind of fun, is to make it, this is one of those like stupid programmer things. I often like to write this way for maximum pointless symmetry. I like to make it look like this. It's just kind of pleasant. Wouldn't you say? I feel like it's true. I don't know why. You can get even more ridiculous with it if you want to, but I feel like that's just kind of a pleasant way to do it. So there we go. Now that we're all chained up, so we can just add variables all day long, and they'll come into a nice hierarchical structure. And so we have to do one other thing. I don't know that there's any reason to do this. I don't know that we really need it, but it does mean that it would simplify our sort of begin variable group, end variable group stuff. So I'm just going to stick it in there because, again, these are debug variables. We can literally compile them completely out if we want to, so we really just don't care how much memory they take. As long as they're, flexible and do what we need them to do, we're totally fine. And so in this case, it's really, really simple, right? Yeah. So that's it. In order to begin a group, all we would do is we'd, again, call add variable. We'd say that we want it to make for us one of these group types. and there's the name of it. That would give us the group. And we don't really have to do anything with the group structure per se other than initialize its variables. So we'll assume that all groups start unexpanded for now. We'll assume that their first child and their last childs are null. There's nothing in them. Right? And then by default, when you begin a variable group, obviously that becomes the new group. Right? That everything will be added in. If you go to add a Boolean, then that's, again, pretty simple. We're just calling the exact same thing again. We're adding a variable here. Right? We're taking the context. We're taking this type. Oops. And we're taking the name. We're then going to set that variable's bool32 value to the value. And that's it. When we end a group, what we will do is say that the context group, which was the current group, we will simply assert that it is not equal to 0, because you can't end a group if there was no group. And then we'll set the new group to be whatever that group's parent was, because we're basically popping the group at that point. Right? So that is actually the entirety of the code necessary to create the entire hierarchical structure of our debug system, right? I mean, it's like, you know, it's like 30 lines of code or something. Very, very, very simple. And that's really all I think that we will need. Now, the debug variable definition context we need to create in order to get the process started. But that's really all there is. So here's our context, right? We can go ahead and set the variables of the context there. Oops. We can set the variables of them. We've got the state. We've got the arena. And so I guess debug create variables would probably do something like this, right? Yeah. And so what we want to do for our very first group is that probably just wants to call begin group, right? So we're going to start with like a root group, if that makes sense. We'll call it the root group, because it just makes our lives a little easier. Because at some level, if we just have a situation where we've got all of this stuff set up for hierarchical things, we might as well just make the root of it be, go through the whole path that we have, right? There's no real reason why we wouldn't do that. It just seems like the obvious thing to do. It just saves a lot of typing. So that's it. So in order to do these here, with this arena, what I'd like to do is, I guess, say that, why do I keep wanting to do that? There we go. I just say that we've got the debug arena, so whatever that arena is, right, that's the one that we would use. Like that. And I think that's basically it. So now, inside Handmade Debug, when we are initialized, when we make our initial attempts to make the arena there, immediately after that, I think would be fine time to create the stuff, right? So there's debug state. I forget where we include this guy, to be honest with you. Okay, there it is. So if this is where this gets included, I'm not sure why Handmade Debug variable group was not... it's because I called it debug group, which was not the name that we said it was going to be. Do I use... Which one did I end up using? So I never used that, so let's try that again. Let's just call it that instead. Yeah. So in this case, we don't really want to store debug variable group pointers because basically everything's a debug variable anyway, so that seems fine. In this case, when we have groups, we really want to talk about group dot, the actual group part of that, since it's in a union, right? Which is pretty easy. Again, same thing here. So this is just basically cleaning up compile errors. Nothing particularly going on. Interesting here, pretty straightforward. So when we return these guys, we're going to have to actually say what we made. so that people can edit them. That's probably a good idea just in general, because we may want people to call in to make special variables at some point or things like this. So we might as well just get in the habit of returning those things out of the functions. Easy enough. What is the problem? Yeah, that was supposed to be a semicolon, but wasn't. And that was an errant quote there. Variable group, that should have one on either side. Here we go. And our debug variable index loop things here, when we do our write handmade config now, we will have to traverse this thing as a hierarchy and write it out. So this is actually perfect because we have about 8 minutes left on the stream. This will give us a perfect test of our construction code to see whether or not it worked, right? So let's go ahead and do that. All we need to do to complete our structure is to have a way to get it, right? In order to get it, all we need to do is say that, well, in here, we just need to have some way of getting to the debug variable that's like our root group, right? Whatever our root group is, that is the thing that we'll iterate over. So we'll assume that the root group has been set because this is the thing that sets it. And in fact, I guess what I can do here as well is just kind of say like, oh, hey, debug create variables. That'll just return whatever that root is, right? So that we can store it on the other side. And so if we do that, well, you know, I don't even know if we want to return it because maybe we'll set multiple things. So let's not even say that. Let's just say that at the end of this, what it does is it takes the state and it sets that root group equal to the context group. So it writes it into the debug state itself. Oops. All right, so now we are in the position to loop over it just fine. And again, this is just going to be a recursive sort of thing. So all we have to do here is just say write handmade config recursive. And what that will do is it will just go ahead and sort of do this exact process. Actually, I guess I should make a separate one of these, something like that. Right. I guess you know what? Since we have parent pointers, I suppose I don't even really need to make it be recursive, do I? Let's try doing it not recursive. Why not? So if I wanted to, I can start with the root group, right? Debug variable, you know, var, and I can say, okay, we know that this is the root group. So the first thing we would do is we'd go to its first child, naturally. And then we're going to iterate over that until we get to the last one, right? So while we still have a var, off we will go. And we would want to write this out, right? So we'd go ahead on while var. And this, by the way, we're going to have to deal with in a bit anyway. Okay, so you need a giant buffer here. So we'll probably want to allocate that, but that's not our problem for the moment. So what we will do is while we have a variable, we will write out the variable that we're on, and then we just need a way of getting to the next variable, right? So we would say, okay, the next thing we're going to write out is going to be dependent on what this thing was, right? So what I'll say first is I'll say if the variable's type was a group. Then I know that we have to descend a level. The next thing I want to write out is going to be like its child or something, right? So I want to do something like the next guy is going to be the var group first child. So that's what I do next, right? If it's not a group, then I want the next pointer to be whatever it actually is, right? So whatever comes after this guy is the guy I'll write out next. However, if there isn't one, so if there's nothing down there, so I got to the end of this list, then what I want to do is say, okay, if there wasn't anybody next, then go up one level of the tree, right? So go, you know, the next pointer is going to be equal to the var parent, which I've gone up one level. And remember, I've already written out the parent, presumably. so at that point, I would want to advance one on the parent as well, right? And presumably, yeah, I need to do this in sort of a while loop fashion, right? I need to sort of do it like this. I need to say while, because I may have to pop up multiple times, right? So it's probably more like this. The first thing would be to say, all right, let's start with something like this. So I'd say start with the one we're on while it's not valid. I'm sorry, while I guess just I might even do a forever one here. So like just keep going, and I'll have the break criteria in here, like something like this, right? So what I would do now is say, okay, first try to go to the next one. If the next one is valid, you print that, because that's the guy we're gonna go. So break out of here, continue the loop, so it'd just be var equals next and done. In fact, I guess since we want var to be at this point, I suppose I could just do this all with var as well, right? So I could just make this all be with var. I don't even know that I really need this next thing. In fact, do I need that at all? I don't think I do. So I suppose it's just this. I don't even know why I introduced that variable. Maybe there was a reason for it. Not sure what it was. So I think I want something else like this. So I go to the next one, if there is a next one, right? So I just do it. That's why I introduced it, because of that nullness, but that was just stupid. I can just say, if there is a next one, go to the next one. That's much cleaner, right? So if there is a next one, go to the next one. If there isn't a next one, then I go to the parent, right? I just say, like, okay, var equals var parent. So I've gone up one. And then I guess this does actually become a while var. And maybe we're done. Does that seem reasonable? Right? So I come in here. I say, assuming var is not null, which I know it isn't the first time through, but I then say, okay, if there is a next one, we go to the next one, and we're done. We print that one out. We advanced up on that one. If there isn't a next one, we go up to the parent, and then we go back to the top of the loop. If there isn't a parent, then we're, by definition, going to fall out of this loop and be done, and we're going to fall out of this loop as well, right? If there was a parent, then we're going to see if it has an X pointer. If it did, we advance to it and break out. If it didn't, we go up to the parent again. Don't know if it'll work. Seems reasonable. All right. So that is about all there is to that, right? So let's see what else we got here. Okay, so value is not a member of debug variable. That's true. We're going to do bool 32 here. So we'll just do something like this. Oops. We'll do that. And then we'll see here, we're just going to turn off, let's turn off this menu. That'll be our job for tomorrow. Okay. There we go. And now what I'd like to see is I'm just going to go ahead and call write handmade config directly so that we can see what it actually does. So I'm going to, again, set a breakpoint, and we're just about out of time. Oops. Hello. There we go. At write handmade config. Run it. And I don't care about push bitmap. Okay. So let's see what we get. So we start off on our group here, and I'm going to also take a look, as we're doing this, I'm going to take a look at the string as well. Right? This is the string right here that we're actually sort of accumulating. So we come in here, and the first thing is a group. So it doesn't print anything out because we don't have to print anything for a group. So we see that it's a group, we descend one child, and here we are on ground chunk outlines. We then see that this is a Boolean, so we print it out. There it is, very good. We then go to see that there is a next, and so we go to the next one, and we print that out as well. So now we've got two things in there, ground chunk outlines and ground chunk. We go to the next variable. There is a next variable, so we print that out. Let's see what that looks like. Again, we've got the third one there. That's exactly as intended. Unfortunately, there isn't a next pointer there. So now we ascend one up, and we try to go to the next one on the parents level. We do get to the next one on the parents level, which is another group. We fall through here. We see if if this is a printable thing. It's not a printable thing. So we go ahead and look at the type. It's a group, so we descend down to the first child of that group, and we see that it's a Boolean. We print it out, blah, 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 right? We get to the end, we write out the file, and let's take a look at the file that we wrote out to see how it looks. Looks perfect. Everything is good. Unfortunately, we did forget one thing, which is that for whatever reason, I totally spaced when we did this. And when we put the names in there, obviously we're going to want to reinsert debug UI in front of it because we've sort of stripped that out from our concept of the names. So I should probably go ahead and make it so that when we actually do write the handmade config, which I'll go ahead and do now, we reinsert that, right? So it's actually going to look like that. Since we know our names are now for pretty printing, they don't have the that particular thing in front of them, right? Yeah, and so that's right. Yeah, that's going to complain. But otherwise, I think we're all good. Again, really simple stuff, nothing too unusual. But we've totally gotten now our all of our stuff organized in a much nicer fashion that we can do stuff with. All right, so let's skip ahead to after it's written. All good. And so now we are good to go. I will pull this guy out from Handmade Debug, and then we will go to the Q&A. So yeah, you can kind of see here too, should kind of mention as an aside, just want to get rid of that. You can kind of see what I did here on the Handmade config write out. So, we could have done this recursively, but it was just so easy to write it in order. That way you don't use the stack, because, when you're going to traverse a tree, you need a stack to traverse a tree if the stack itself doesn't have pointers back up the chain, right? But the way that I chose to do this, just because it was debug code and there wasn't any real reason not to use the space, we have these parent pointers. So we can always just walk without using any storage. We can always just walk through just knowing whoever we're on, because whenever we get to the end of something in there, we just chase those parent pointers back up and then know that we can continue traversing that way. So it just makes it, pretty easy to do that. Okay, so that's all there is for today. Tomorrow we will start writing some code to print it out that way and allow ourselves to expand and collapse our list. But that's pretty good. I think we're all set, and yeah, that puts us in good position for tomorrow. With that, I will go to the question and answers. If you have a question about what we've done, please post it now with a Q colon in front of it so that I can see it and hopefully answer it. Elvin, can we make it an option to toggle between optimized and debug builds from the debug menu? Not at the immediate moment, because at the immediate moment, we don't rewrite the build script at all. But yes, it would be easy for us to do that. We would just have to, well, there's two ways we could do it. Either A, we switch back to doing single translation unit with pragma optimize off, which I think is probably what we want to do, now that we know that the reason it wasn't working before was because we have to also include the pragma optimize stuff around inline functions. So we could try that again. That's probably the right thing to do. And then at that point, all we would do is put debug brackets around the pragma optimize offs, so that if we turn off that define, it would run the code optimized. So that's probably the way we should do it. But the other way we could do it without changing how we're doing optimizations right now is we could just have a build include file essentially, which just sets some environment variables, and then we would write that out in there. And one of the things it would set is like additional command line switches, and those would either be -OD or -O2, right? So yeah, so that's. But I think we should probably change to the other. I think we should probably switch to using the single translation unit build again, because that would be better for a number of reasons. Let's see. Can you run the tool to see how many lines of code we have? Yes, I can. Clock and make code. 13,000, I guess. Wouldn't it be prettier visually in our config files to be indented according to their group depth? That way we know which variables belong to which group, i.e. variables in the root group don't have any indentation. Group depth 1 will have a single level indentation. I don't know that we care, because I don't think we will ever use that. Like I don't, we'll look, like the game writes this, so I don't know that we will ever read it. But if you want to, obviously it's really trivial, right? You just say the depth is 0 or whatever, right? And each time you do this, you increment the depth, and each time you do this, you decrement the depth, you know? And then in here you just do, right, like, just really, really basic, or indent less than depth, plus indent, and you know, well, you don't even have to do that. You just do this. Right, something like that. I guess I gotta call this from somewhere so you can see if it worked, but it would yeah, something like this. I mean, the other thing you'd probably want to do, I'm just guessing, if this is your jam, like you're like I need this in my life, this is what makes me feel whole inside, and all that sort of thing. You would probably, because we don't print out groups in there, you know, you would probably want to add those as comments, right? So you'd probably want to add something like, you know, you know, you'd be doing this sort of action. Oops. Right? Which we need to do anyway. And so when you encountered a group, you would also say what that group was. So you do a thing where you were like, oh yeah, you know, just say what the group name is as a comment, something like this. And then when you ran it, it would insert lines for groups even though they don't need to be defined, just so you can see where they are, if that makes sense. So it's a little wonky, because you might want to control whether you print an indent or not based on whether anyone's going to actually be doing it. And so you kind of get in this weird situation where you're like, okay, do I print an indent? Don't I print an indent? But you assume that if everyone always prints something out, you know, you would do it that way probably as well, so that you can, you know, have camera be indented. You might also want this sort of thing, I guess, so that it's a little easier to read your indents. Right? But that's, yeah. Someone has posted a link to the forums. Why have you posted a link to the forums, but you have not told me why am I going there? Ah, I see. So this is request for changes. All right, maybe we can do those because we've got some time. Let me look at questions first, but I could do some of those changes for people who want to run on Linux. Let me just go ahead and make sure that we take out the call to this, though. So I don't want to leave that in, really. Do you have any add-ons that you are using with Emacs? Is it something like Spacemacs? No, there are no add-ons. It's just vanilla Emacs. Off-topic question, are you using your Razer on stream? No, my Razer Blade Pro laptop, I'm not using it at the moment, and my it's my I use it for dev, so it's not here, and this is my old DOS Keyboard 3. My Razer keyboard is actually it's plugged into the Razer Blade laptop at the moment. Just CGR not running the game today. We were running the game. We ran the game at the beginning of the stream. Elvin, was the intro talk about Handmade Con included as part of the main hour of the stream? Yes, it's in the recording. It will be in the YouTube archive. Switching between debug and optimized mode would not need a restart of the whole game. Nope, I probably wouldn't. I can't really think of any reason why it would, like off the top of my head. A-Slam Seer, Simulatory, can we sometimes see you play a game on Twitch, just like John does, just a chill-out stream? Would love to hear your opinion on many different games. You can. There's this channel, Simulatory. I don't really have typically a ton of time to do it, but I do it occasionally, and I put the archival thing on, so... What about a handmade certification for games? A badge of honor could be placed in a splash screen or in the credits. Please use certifications, e.g. Australian made. Could be organized at the conference. So I think that's not really something that I'm super interested in. I mean, like, I'm interested in people being excited about doing handmade dev stuff the way that we do it. Like, I'm interested in people caring about code and caring about how their code works. But I don't necessarily know that they need to have some kind of a certification, you know? So I don't know. I mean, if other people did that, that's fine. But I'm not, that's probably not something that I would do. Because the important part is that people care about it. And it's not so much, I don't even know what the certification process would be. Like, what would you certify, you know? Because you'd have to have some way of saying what were you even trying to certify? That the programmer was interested in how their code came out, you know? I mean, and how do you certify that? Just have them say they did, you know? So I'm not really sure. Power C9K, thanks to you, I was able to implement dynamic code reloading for my project too, saving me a ton of time. That is awesome to hear. Wait, there is a Nacer. John has commented. Why did I not see it? Nacer idiot. Why do I have no stream? I paid the micropayment. I don't know, man. Did you buy enough coins to purchase the stream? Because it's like 100 coins, you can get a gem, and for every gem that you get, you have a chance of being able to watch the stream. And if you get like at least 8 gems of different colors, then you are like guaranteed to be able to watch the stream for a little while anyway. All right, so somebody posted a link to the thing about Linux stuff, so I'm gonna see if we can do that. So here's what it says on the forums. These are people who ported the game to Linux already. SEL Handmade SEL Handmade does run on Linux and OS X, but requires some small changes to Casey's code. We are looking for volunteers to bring these issues to Casey's attention during the stream. Currently, the following methods need to be implemented in Handmade platform.h. And so basically what they're doing is they're just sending in what the things are that need to be implemented in order for the code to compile on Linux. Because like I said, we wrote all the code to be basically cross-platform. So for the most part, you can just compile it, but there's a few platform-specific things we have to call in our code that need to happen. And so specifically like these atomics, for example, these atomics are things that we need to implement per platform because they're different. And so it looks like these have been posted. So let's take a look here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assume, I guess, that atomic compare exchange UN32 is correct. So that these are the only ones, like you see, we have not implemented them yet because we don't compile on Linux. But other people do. So try to be nice. So it looks like what they've got here is that the code for this just requires us calling sync, lock, test, and set with just the value and new. That's it. No casting necessary. Atomic add is sync, fetch, and add the value and the addend, and then the get thread ID is, I guess, different depending on which platform you are compiling it for. Even though it's under LLVM, it is not always the same, I guess. So the way this works is there's a thread ID, if defined Apple, elif defined i386, elif defined x86-64, else error unsupported architecture. Okay. And then in order to get that thread ID on the Apple model, they say you have to do this. That's some stuff right there. Lovely. So I guess you have to move the, so the thread ID on Apple is right at the base of the GS segment. So you're just going to straight up grab that in, like so. This is inline assembly, gas style, GNU assembler style, which is some crazy stuff right there. It's basically outputting one of those MOV instructions like we see, and that's the GS segment. And it's going to put the result in thread ID. This %0 here is kind of like printf. It's saying take the this variable from the actual function, and the assembly that I want to emit will store this part of the GS in here. And the crazy part about GNU assembler is it goes the other way around from Intel assembler. So although, you know, if you remember on stream, we always see like when we go to the disassembly and we look at a move instruction, the destination comes first and the source comes second. Well, in GNU assembler, it's backwards. So basically, the source comes first, the destination comes second. So this actually, even though it looks like it's moving into GS, it's actually moving out of GS, which can wreak havoc on poor assembly language programmers. If you're used to it, you got to like reverse all your thinking, which is kind of crazy. Okay, so it looks like, again, same exact thing on i386 and on Linux. They're all actually the same. It's just which segment and where it uses. These are just because of the calling convention of the operating system, where it ends up storing that particular piece of information. But there you go. Okay, so that we have now done what was requested of that. And now we also need casting for one thing. And Martin's Mosaico was also suggesting that the if-defined Apple should actually be an if-defined Apple, I think, and defined x86-64. Because otherwise, apparently that will trigger on the iOS, which is not you don't want that to happen. So you want it to hit an unsupported architecture error at that point. MSVC 2013 has SNPrintf function that is almost like sprintf. So instead of using ugly sprintf function, we could use this and then use sprintf in all places. Then no one will have issues on OS X, Linux, or even MingWinW. Also add CR2 cure to deprecate argument for CL to not generate deprecation warning. So they were basically saying SNPrintf would be better than the one we were using. And that does seem totally fine to me if we wanted to. Again, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of the C runtime library entirely. So it'd be fine for now if we use SNPrintf, I guess. Does that actually work? Well, we'd have to actually pound include something, I guess, for it to work. But I'm not sure what that would be, because it doesn't look like it's in here. So I'm not sure about that. We're going to leave that for now. So we should probably also just remove that dependency soon so that it doesn't bother anyone else. So the last thing they were saying in order to get us compiling correctly on Windows, on Linux and Mac as well, for people who were trying to do those builds, was that timed function needs to cast the function name. That's what they were saying. Oh, so cast away the const there. But that sounds like it, so I think we're good to go. Stephen Last, does the idea for having your compile switch variable switch speed cake involve compiling code out with if0? Yes, it does. It's pretty straightforward if you think it through. I'm not going to do anything too weird, but it's just like, it was the natural sort of thing that you would think to do, so I was going to try it. Naysayer88, why don't you use Lua? Are you dumb? So the reason that we don't use Lua on the stream right now is actually, it's totally that. Obviously, all games should be written entirely in Lua, because that way it's like really hard to debug and it's slow. And that's what you want, you know, ideally in a game, is you want it to be both slow and hard to debug, because that really helps your productivity. And also, if possible, you want your language to not have a lot of features in it. So you want to be like hard to program in that language, and Lua also does that as well. So Lua pretty much gets the 3 points that you want for writing game in. So ideally, we'd write the whole game in Lua. The only reason I didn't do that is because I was too dumb to get it working. So we tried to get it working and then just failed, and we just gave up because we're like, we're way too dumb for this. There's no way we're going to be able to do it. But yeah, smart people would just write the whole game in Lua. Registration. How do you handle multi-threading? We have a bunch of you can go back and watch the episodes where we implement multi-threading. It's pretty simple. We don't do anything too crazy. Rum code. You've inspired me to forget about my years of commercial experience writing RM GUIs and to go implement IM GUI for my game. I love coding again. Well, that's really good to hear. I'm very happy to hear that. Miblo, Elvin, someone asked a question about push-struct on that day, so I'm guessing Casey might have introduced it then. Okay, I think that was just an answer to someone's question. Insobot. That's not really a question. UD, Handmade Hero, how long have you been making games? Well, I mostly I work on game tech. I don't really make games per se. So most of my experience is on programming game tech stuff, and that I've been doing for, I guess, professionally 20 years. NXSY, check unmatched parentheses in elif in thread ID extraction. Where are you? There we go. Ah, thank you. Okay, there we go. Cubic Caleb. What? I don't know. Registration. Do you streaming your development motivated you to do more or more consistently? No, not really. I'm only streaming the development for educational purposes. I still work full-time on a different game during the day. So this is strictly for teaching, is the reason that I'm streaming this. It's not because, it's not for any other reason. Did you use snprintf or sprintf? The defined thing changed snprintf to snprintf. Not sure what you mean. snprintf did not seem to be available to us. Right? So it looks like we could use underscore snprintf. I don't know if that helps anyone else, though. I'm just gonna not deal with that right now, to be honest, because I think we should just go ahead and replace that, and we can do that. Maybe we'll do that next week. It's not very much work. Do you use any type of documentation or design for this project? What types of documents have you produced, planning to produce for this project? I guess I would say I don't really like using the term document to refer to something game related, because it often sounds like a thing that I associate with really bad games. So I have some notebooks that I use to plan things out in terms of the game design stuff, but I'm not really the type of person who's like gonna make a document. I'm not a game designer, so that's really probably not my place to talk about, though. All right, I think we have come to the end of the queue, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to wrap it up. Close this. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org. If you pre-order the game, it comes with a source code. You can always play around with it at home, learn from it, and experiment with it, which is a good way to go if you're trying to learn from the stream. We also have a Patreon page you can subscribe to if you want to try and support the video series. But that is, of course, always appreciated, and the video series is always free, even if you don't. We try to, again, do things as altruistically as possible here. So the video series is free and always will be, and you can get it on the video archive as well as on the forum site, where you can ask questions or view annotated episode guides that people in the community have made, so you can go back and watch old episodes and see like where certain questions were asked or when I talked about a certain topic, that sort of thing. It's really pretty awesome. That's about it. If you want to catch the show live, we'll be back here again 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time tomorrow. Same time, same place. We will also, if you're wondering when the stream's live in general, we have a tweet bot that tweets the schedule at you, which you can subscribe to get notifications, or you can just check it periodically to see when the show's going to be. It posts a full schedule on the weekend or on Monday, and then every day it posts a reminder that just says this is when the stream will be for this day. So you can always just go to the top post of the tweet bot, and it tells you this is when the stream's going to be. So that's about it. Hope to see you guys back here tomorrow when we will implement, now that we have a backing structure for our hierarchical control, we'll just implement the hierarchical control. So that'll be pretty fun, I think, and we'll be able to play with it. So that'll be good. Hope to see you here for that. Until then, have fun programming, and I'll see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.